Hello and welcome everybody to another week of BEARSKIFILM on a very exciting Monday, the opening of free agency, and we have a lot to talk about, a lot of Bears moves during the last couple days, and especially today, some exciting stuff. But I just want to start this off by saying, like David, I've told you before, when it comes to fandom, being a Bears fan, and I was talking to Shane with Windy City End Zone. He said, you could choose to sit here and be negative all the time. He's like, well, what's the point of that? You, you know, He's like, I know you hate hope, but you still have to have some hope. And I've described myself as that worm on a fishing line that's gotten reeled back in a couple times. And like I'm all decrepit and gray now. Here it is, man. Got a little wiggle. You got a wiggle out of me. David, am I insane?
No. I feel better going into this season realistically than I did last season. Not just because of like the hype and everything that comes with it, but I think realistically that it's being built better this offseason and in ways that make sense in terms of football. It's, a lot of the questions that we had were answered, I guess, or at least addressed. And is it going to be perfect? No. Are me and you going to start going opposite and start predicting 13, 14, 15 wins? No. But I like certain things that were done, and I think they are going to lead to, at least if something else goes wrong, it's not going to be the thing that matters, if that makes sense. Like, I would rather deal with issues let other teams commonly deal with rather than the obvious bear stuff, which is like offensive line and not enough depth and, bad coach, yada, yada, yada. So I'm more optimistic about this season realistically than I was probably last year.
Right. And it was interesting to see the Bears take a step back after getting Caleb Williams. I don't think anybody really expected that last year to wind up at 5 wins. But I mean, man, to go on that massive losing streak was just such a letdown. But you're right. I don't think it's a foreshadowing of the future. I think there's a lot of new pieces, especially when it comes to the coaching staff and, the trenches. The trenches have been such an issue, and they're out there addressing them. I mean, we could start with the earliest move with Jonah Jackson. What do you think about that?
I like it just as a high upside kind of signing. I think also familiarity. And I think, again, people can nitpick, and I can nitpick. I don't think it's like perfect. I don't think it's a Kevin Zeitler, who is still a free agent, by the way, somehow. I do think the Bears did a few things right, and they saw what the class was going to be, the guard market. And you got guys that I can't really name, and I forgot their names already, but it was the guy off of San Francisco. I think it was Jones or something like that ended up getting like 20 plus million per year. Right now, Jonah Jackson is at 17.5 million and Joe Thuney are at 16 million per year. So you've got guys that are at least proven NFL starters that have played for a longer amount of time that probably will get more work done. And they're going to end up costing you less other than a 4th or a 6th round draft pick, which, if you were going to draft a 4th round lineman or a 4th round pick, you're not expecting much productivity out of them anyway. I think I said this to you the day it happened. If you end up cutting Jonah Jackson and your experiment was a 4th round pick, it's not the end of the world. Because guess what? That's what Ryan Bates cost you at the end of the day. And most of us are calling for him to get cut at this point.
Yeah, right? I believe Jonah was the 6th round pick.
I'm sorry, 6th round pick. Yep. Thank you. 6th round pick. That's even more, tolerable, and you can easily swallow that kind of draft pick. So I think it was worth it. And it was Aaron Banks, 4 years, 77 million, basically at 20 million, who's going to cost more than Jonah Jackson or Joe Thuney, who both at some point were Pro Bowlers, right? So I like it. Was it perfect? No, but also that familiarity with Ben Johnson, that makes sense. And it has to be done because we just always see this with new coaching staffs. You got to get them some guys that can speak the same language or fit in or give like a work ethic type of thing. And I think between the two of them with Thuney and Jackson, I think you're going to see like at least team leaders. We're going to see plays where our line mauled somebody and like created a wide open lane. We haven't seen that in a while. So, we've seen some nice touchdown runs, but they're basically like off of luck or just a perfect block once every game or something like that. I think we're going to see some like actual running the football down people's throats this year.
So just, trying to go through the tape a little bit on him. First off, he's coming off of a hurt season, right? So we're trying to get a guy that's been injured last year. At first I was saying, well, if Ben Johnson liked him so much, why'd the Lions let him go? And somebody on Twitter said, well, maybe they just couldn't afford what he was asking. Totally fair response. Probably exactly what happened. He was just asking for too much money, more money that they were at least comfortable paying him. And he went to the Rams. The Rams, I think he started 4 games on there. They started 2 games at center with him. I know he had an upper body injury that got re-aggravated and he got put on IR. Just looking at the tape from the year past when he was on the Lions wasn't very impressive. But listen, the guy's getting pushed off his blocks. I didn't see much of a motor, but like you said, David, it's a 6th-round pick. A lot worse ways that this could go. Don't mind taking a shot there. I hate the familiarity thing just because I'm scarred by Lucas Patrick and Luke and all that stuff. It's That's like great, you know what I mean? But yeah, for what it cost and what it is, and for it to be the first domino that fell, like you said, I could nitpick all day if we want to, but this line definitely needs massive attention. Just about every move is going to be an upgrade, right? So you can't overall big picture. You can't sit there and like complain much about a move like that.
The other part of it too is that, and I feel like it's got to be said, is that sorry, I lost my train. Like these are not long-term replacements. Basically, none of these guys are. These are immediate fixes to kind of get the train back on track. And that's why, we can talk about draft and maybe do a mock later and stuff like that. But I don't by any means think that you need to be changing the way you draft this year based on who you signed and who you just traded for. Joe Thuney's 32 years old. Yes, can you get like 2-3 years out of him? Sure, but you still need to have guys in the back seat ready to take over in case they get hurt, in case they're underproducing, for whatever reason. I don't see Jonah Jackson as any type of like, this guy's here for the next 5 years. That's why I think people are kind of like, oh, he's young, so he can be here for a while with Ben Johnson. He could get cut, like I said, this year, and I wouldn't really blink. So,
right.
I don't think it changes the way you approach things.
I think you said it best in our group chat with Carl. You said, listen, I'm not trying to get a top 5 offensive line. Just trying to get out of the bottom 5 here, right? Yeah. So, right, like we just want to get this thing back to at least a respectable level because it was ugly. 68 sacks on your rookie quarterback. Like
middle of the pack would be massive. If you were the 20th, 18th best line in football this year, I'd consider that a massive win.
Yeah, definitely. And so, then they go off and make a big splash by trading to the Kansas City Chiefs for their, all-pro guard. Thuney, Joe Thuney's been in the league for a long time. He still has some years ahead of him. He's at his prime. He's been to 4 Super Bowls?
Yeah.
This is a guy that is going to, you talk about leadership, this guy's going to be a leader in this damn locker room. I thought that was a great move, any which way you spin it, to be honest with you.
I think he's like a full-on culture change. This is like that's one of those culture-changing trades of like your whole franchise, of your whole locker room. Is there an individual player on this team better at football than Joe Thuney right now? I don't think so.
Probably
I
not.
think you just traded a 4th-round pick for the best football player on your team. So that's, I don't care what he costs and what you need to restructure. And then I did hear this is one of those positive ones. Joe Thuney is the exact same age as Trent Williams when Trent Williams got traded to the 49ers. So this is one of those great comparison things where I've heard where not only is Joe Thuney traded at the same exact age as Trent Williams was when he went to the 49ers, he has 1 year less experience of football. Joe Thuney came into football, so he missed a full 16 seasons. You could say maybe he played more games total thanks to like playoff games and everything, but this is a very similar in my mind. If you want to have like a direct parallel, I think the Joe Thuney to Trent Williams kind of culture changing, best football player, like left tackle, left guard, like Joe Thuney's going to walk up and just manhandle somebody and be like, this is how we do things here now. This is my shit. This is my show. You run behind me every time. And I think that's the kind of move that you got with like Joe Thuney. I couldn't be more impressed with that move. I couldn't be more happy about the move. I think it's the best move of the offseason by far. So far for any team, really. I don't think anybody's made a splash like this so far. So I think it's a really, really underrated, huge move. So
Yeah, especially for a 4th-round pick. I mean, this isn't like pulling Jason Peters out of the retirement home at the age of 39, asking him to play left tackle or anything like that. This guy still has plenty of football ahead of him. Yeah, I agree with you. Huge splash move for a 4th-round pick. I mean, it's just fills such a huge need for us. I'm so happy. That's the move that needed to be made, in my opinion. So good job to them for making that move. Do you think the ties that Ryan Poles has with the Kansas City Chiefs kind of helped make that possible? Maybe.
I don't know. I mean, a lot of the moves being made before the free agency, I think clearly speak to people needing to get familiarity, right? So like Ben Johnson getting Jonah Jackson, and then possibly even Joe Thuney and the Chiefs kind of doing that separation. It makes sense. I don't know if it necessarily helped. I don't think it hurt. And if other teams, I think this is one of those times where I don't know if any other team seeing what moves are being made today, even with like the Commanders getting Laramie Tunsil, right, for a bunch of like third, fourth mixture of picks. I can't imagine the Redskins or the Commanders wouldn't make the same exact trade if it was offered to them, or even give a third. Because the Texans need a guy, the Redskins needed a guy, the Patriots. I don't know if Joe Thuney would go back there under that kind of situation, but yeah, I've seen that. I think realistically, any team would have made that trade. So it's definitely not a bad trade. And how the Bears got to it first, I won't know. I couldn't possibly know, but maybe just the association with Trey Smith and how that was going to go. Maybe it was a little bit, as like our friend Carl likes to say, a little under the table handshake, right? Because if you think about it, if you know that the Bears are going to go hard after Trey Smith and you have connections with Ryan Poles, you go, hey, Trey's either going to be really, really pissed because he knows that he left money on the table, not going to the Bears. How about, like, we'll trade you Thuney, and then that way you don't push as hard in free agency. I don't know how that works. It probably wouldn't be that realistic, but it didn't. I don't know. It probably doesn't help, but it doesn't hurt either. So
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I was just wondering about that because there is that connection there with Ryan Poles and the Kansas City Chiefs front office and whatnot. So I was wondering if that maybe helped us. But I mean,
yeah.
dude, for me, my biggest need by far was center.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been screaming at the top of a mountain for center, and to hear that Drew Dalman turned down more money to come here, I think speaks volumes, man. And dude, it's so hard to sit there and put tape on offensive linemen. I mean, I've tried to, but unless these guys have a huge motor and it's just not fun to watch necessarily. And Drew Dalman, though, man, he's got a motor. This guy's running down the field. A lot of times when I saw like 10+ yard rushes, when that running back goes down, Drew Dalman's the first lineman up there, sometimes even helping this guy up. And so to me, that's huge. Like, you want a guy that's got a big motor. And yeah, man, I'm really excited for Dalman being here as a center. I think that's also a big move. And I was really happy to see that that's how, today free agency kicked off with getting him signed and having him on his team, snapping the ball for Caleb Williams moving forward.
Yeah, I try to, find and listen to people who are smarter than me about football. And one of the guys I really liked going into the free agency was a guy named Matt Bowen, NFL writer analyst on ESPN. And then, he was like a 7-year, 10-year vet in the NFL, always been around the NFL. He put together like the list of 100 free agents. And he was a lot higher on Dalman in terms of how he would fit on the Bears than I think a lot of people would say. When you talked about Jonah Jackson having an injury and only playing 4 games, it's a upper body injury, right? He had like a clavicle thing, like a collarbone basically. Dalman had I think like an ankle or like a leg injury, which those always worry me more than upper body, because upper body injuries for linemen I feel like are freak accidents rather than lower body where you have to like drive and push and do all that stuff off of your lower body. So I'm a little bit worried about it. I mean, in terms of like the injury, but yeah, agreed, man. You got like a 26, 27-year-old center who's been around the block, who played really, really well last year. And from everything I hear, he's exactly that outside zone type of center that Ben Johnson is absolutely needing in his type of offense, where you can kind of do those outside zone handoffs, turn that around into a play action pass. And I think it's already trying to start like molding through by the guys that you're picking up. I think you're showing like what kind of offense you can kind of see coming. with the Bears and what he's going to bring over to, like, Caleb's play style and how it's going to be positive. But I had a few thoughts on free agency first, like some positive, some negative, if that's okay, before we kind of break down the rest of these guys.
Yeah, let's do it.
So, like, the positive is going into this offseason, I think, like I've been joking here with our friend Carl and all that stuff, I am so proud of Bears fans for bullying George McCaskey into changing the way he does things. And I can't remember the last time a checkbook opened up this freely for the Bears. And I think nobody's really talking about that. And, like, I'll be the first one to make fun of George. I hate George. George deserves a lot of credit this offseason. He let Ryan do everything. And there was not a penny or a blank check left in that Rolodex. Like, he's opening up the whole bank account. It's pretty impressive.
The summer of George.
The summer of George continues. Yeah. You get a nice pass rusher or some linemen in the draft this offseason. Hoo-wee. The summer of George continues. Secondly, that's definitely the positive. The kind of the negative I saw out of this free agency is it's not my money. I really never care about how much you pay players. You know that. I know that. And you always said this, and I agreed with you completely. Every year, the Bears were always bragging about how much salary cap space you have and all this. And the problem with that is because you have a lot of salary cap space because you don't have any good players worth paying, right? Because if you had enough good players worth paying and extending over long periods of time, that money would go to them. So you don't. And that's the problem. So having a lot of money in free agency doesn't necessarily mean anything good. What I think happened this offseason was the Bears saw what the Commanders did this offseason and said, you know what, we can do that too. We can fix certain parts of our team with good coaches and a full offseason of free agency with, like, veteran guys who kind of have been around the block and play football and just improve that way, improve depth, improve talent. They're picking up older guys, but none of them miss games. Joe Thuney doesn't miss games. Grady Jarrett played all 17 games last year. Dayo played, I think, all games. He didn't start. He started only like 2 of them, but he played in all 17 games. So, again, Dalman's, one freak injury, Jackson freak injury. That's I guess to be expected. But I think they saw that and they did it. The one negative I have, and it's not about money and how it's being spent, is I hope they didn't maybe necessarily blow their load too early, because you filled every single position of need today. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I hope that every guy that they got was their first choice and not necessarily, right, like, I'm seeing that Dalvin Tomlinson from the Browns is about to be released, right? You're going to see these weird releases start to happen towards middle of the summer, end of the year. Trades are still going to kind of happen. Training camp cuts are going to happen. And if you paid, Grady Jarrett or Dayo all this money, you kind of can't go out and get like a pass rusher. This closes the door on Trey Hendrickson, right? In my mind. So, yeah, could you have, like, is it good? I hope so. I hope you knew exactly what you were doing. But I think part of that pressure that you put on George and forcing him to just be like, you know what, go ahead, just get everything, fill everything in free agency, first day, second day, whatever. But maybe a little bit more patience would have paid off, because, you see Josh Sweat just signed for what, $2 million more per year than Dayo. And you gotta, I would argue that Josh Sweat was better. Maybe not for Dennis Allen's scheme, but that's my only issue with it. Positive, it's fucking awesome, man. Great day. Great day. Every time a piece of news dropped, I got excited. Absolutely. Don't get me wrong. I'm super positive on today. The future part of me that's thinking ahead already, did maybe they just kind of sign everybody just to appease and fill those roster spots? Because now all that's left is like minimal amounts of money to kind of fill roster spots. But yeah, so that's my only concern. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, and so, I mean, multiple ways. One, we were coming into this with, the biggest cap space available numbers from most teams. Well, were we 6th on the list, I believe? So it's not like we don't have the money there to spend. It's been the last couple of years that we've had the money to spend. So it's like, just go ahead and spend it. I don't think we're in that terrible of a position just yet. I mean, there's some teams that go into the offseason with as much available money as we do. But I hear you. It does shut the door on some of these like big moves if you wanted to, make another big move or something like that. So it doesn't concern me too much though, because I know you've heard this before. The league year is not one in free agency. It's not. So like you could, you know, you could spin that both ways, because I could argue that when we got Julius Peppers or when we got Khalil Mack, those are two huge moves that really changed those seasons around. So, I know that quote's out there. I'm not sure the validity of it necessarily, but I mean, I don't feel that we can do this all in one off season anyway, right? So I feel like the moves that are being made are actually pretty good, well thought out moves to fill needs. And it's kind of what Carl is saying here, that now we get to approach the draft properly. Yeah, it definitely opens up the avenue for you to be able to draft a lot differently than just totally focus on team need, right? Because like, so I was going to pitch this to you. I mean, I wanted to go through the free agents first, but I mean, I can even pitch it to you now. So like, okay, so now if Ashton Genty's there and they make that move, I mean, I know I have my draft philosophy and I know you have yours, and I know we hate drafting running backs in the first round, and that's not something that we like, but the Lions did do it with Jahmyr Gibbs. You know what I mean? So I'm just saying that whatever our philosophy is ours. It doesn't mean that that's what Ben Johnson and staff are going to do, right? So is that something now that might actually entertain them a little bit more because they're able to sit here and hit on some of these? Or do you think there's still some other needs that really need attention? Like, in my opinion, I know we just, got Thuney and Jonah Jackson, but like, I'm still a little worried about the guard position. Hell, one injury away, right? So I'm still worried about the left tackle position. That could be upgraded. Man, I still think we need a defensive end. Like,
yeah, me too.
So those things, I would much rather see like a defensive end get drafted than a running back personally. But however, like I said, the options are now more open than they were before this. So I don't know. What do you think?
I'm completely agreeing with Carl in his comment that it is about best player available right now. I just don't think Genty, he's not anywhere close to Saquon. He's not anywhere close to the talent of a guy like Bijan when he got drafted, right? Coming out of college. I don't think either of them are anywhere near there. I see Kieran has actually joined us if he wants to hop in before.
Hey, guys.
Kieran, nice to meet you, man. Oh,
sorry, you're muted off, David. Yeah, sorry to cut you off, David. Yeah, I just want to welcome Kieran Hall to this show. Is it Kieran or Kieran? How do you say it exactly?
Yeah, Kieran.
Yep. So I just wanted to welcome Kieran from the Irish Bears Show for taking the time to join us. I know we're on 2 different time zones, so we really appreciate you hopping on with us, man. We were totally looking forward to having you on to talk some Bears football. And thank you for coming by, man.
No problem. It works out this time around because your guys' clocks changed 2 weeks before ours, so that worked out a lot easier.
There you go. I think everybody knows who you are, Kieran. At least seen your logo on their Bears Twitter. Huge Irish Bears Twitter fan, and I see your notifications popping up all the time. So thanks for joining us.
Oh yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I always like talking Bears, so always gonna come on.
Yeah. Going through, we just kind of reviewed about what we thought Jonah Jackson and the Joe Thuney moves are, and I think overly we were positive just because when you see moves like being made today. I forgot the name already. The fella from San Francisco going to the
Aaron Banks.
Aaron Banks Jr. Yeah, he costing more money annually than a guy like Joe Thuney or Jonah Jackson. Like that's a rough price tag for guys that are either a Pro Bowler, All Pro, or a guy like Jonah Jackson who's a Pro Bowler reclamation project. So I think Ryan Pohl's got a good head start on the guard market there. Any comments on that part for yourself?
Yeah. I expected that Banks was going to get a fairly high contract because I think I mentioned this on our podcast recently that he was being linked with the Bears about the local guys, but also national guys. And I think it was the first 2 days of the combine where there was a lot of rumors around Aaron Banks, and then suddenly it died. And then 24 hours later, the Bears made a trade for Jonah Jackson. And then 24 hours later, they made a trade for Joe Thuney. So we all knew what was happening there. And I think it was very obvious that the Bears didn't like the price that they were being told at the combine for guys like Aaron Banks. And thank God, because if they signed him for $77 million, I'd probably be pulling my hair out right now because that is that is crazy for a guy that's been fine, but not to a point of paying $18.5 million a year. It's a bit crazy. But look, I'm happy with the moves that the Bears have been able to do. They make sense. One guy familiarity with the coach, the other one all pro guard, and even more so is a really good leader, which is something that the Bears badly need. End of the day, last year having 8 captains and having none on the offensive line is a massive red flag. And I think this year I wouldn't be surprised if there's multiple guys on that O line that would be part of, if they end up having, I don't know if they'll have a leadership group, but having captains throughout the year, I'd be very surprised if you don't see one or two guys that are on that offensive line kind of step up this year.
I agree.
Yeah, definitely. And, I was just asking David, so with the moves that they have been able to make so far in free agency, me and David personally, we're not big fans of drafting like a running back in the first round.
Neither am I.
Okay. But what we think and what our philosophy is doesn't necessarily mean that that's what the Bears' philosophy is. I mean, you saw Ben Johnson, the Detroit Lions, move up for Jahmyr Gibbs.
Mhm.
And so do you think that these moves open up a lane to where they could go ahead and kind of play around with that first pick a little bit? Or do you think that there's still enough needs, like I think they still need a defensive end, for example, to where they still need to kind of take that team needs variable and accompany it with the best player available and make, a more smart move? Or do you think they're just going to go out there and gamble?
I don't think they'll gamble. I've been kind of against what the majority have been saying in terms of Ashton Genty, where look, excellent player. I don't think he's going to be the pick that the Bears are going to go for, even if he was there at 10, because it's a very strong class. I do think that the Bears will take a running back with the first 4 picks that they have. I just don't think it's going to be the first round. I don't think that they look. The one thing that you can say about Ryan Poles and his front office is they do kind of try and stick to value, especially early on in the draft. And it's the reason why, for the most part, that they have drafted players in some of the more valuable positions. They drafted a wide receiver, which we've seen where the money has gone there. They've drafted a right tackle. And then obviously in their first year drafting kind of a cornerback in Kyler Gordon with one of the first kind of second round picks. They usually know a value is early on, so I'd be surprised if it's going to be a running back. Like, I think it's just people kind of adding 2 and 2 together and getting 5 just because the Detroit Lions drafted Jahmyr Gibbs. I do think that they'll probably take one early. I just don't think they'll take one in the top 10 because I think there's going to be too much value elsewhere there. Like you mentioned it, defensive end, definitely a possibility. At 10, it depends who's going to be there. I know a lot of people like James Pierce. I don't know if that's going to be a fit for the particular defense that Dennis Allen's going to run. I don't know. I don't see him as a defensive end that we've typically seen in a Dennis Allen defense. But again, could be a possibility with what they've done now in free agency where Dayo could push inside on certain downs and you can have a guy like that kind of coming off the edge where they're not going to have to play every down. You could wait until the second round. There's a bunch of guys there that you could target. Again, if a guy like Mason Graham falls a little bit, it just makes it a little bit easier for you to make that selection. If you like a different defensive tackle, you can go in that way. The one thing I like about what they've done in free agency is I think if you don't fix the interior of your offensive line, you go into the draft being like, well, you have to take it at 10. Now you don't have to do that. If you don't bring in a guy like Dayo, who they brought in, who fits kind of the mold of a defensive end that we've seen from Dennis Allen in the past, well, then you're like, well, you have to take a defensive end at 10. Well, no, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing for a defensive tackle. You bring in Grady Jarrett. Before you would be, if you didn't bring him in and you didn't have anyone to kind of help out with Javon Dexter, where he doesn't have to play every single down, you'd be like, at 10, you probably have to take a defensive tackle. You're at the point now where you don't have to do any of that. You can kind of wait to see how the first 7 picks go, and see kind of where you want to go from there. Can you convince a team to move up a little bit? I always find that that's difficult in the draft where there's no high end, like real high end talent in terms of teams typically trade up for quarterbacks or left tackles. There's not many of them in this draft, so that's where it becomes a little bit tricky for them. But what I like about it, and I always say, is you don't want to chase a position in the draft. You want to be able to make sure that the value of the pick matches up with the players that are currently available. Because if you chase, that's where you make mistakes. And that's where we've made mistakes in the past. That's where Ryan Poles has made mistakes in the past with kind of his later picks. So what I hope to see is that what they've done now in free agency is that they've improved their offensive line, defensive line. They still have a lot of depth pieces that they need to kind of fix. Like they had 25 free agents this year, so they have a lot of guys that they need to add in, and it'll be in kind of wave 2, wave 3, and what you hope that they can achieve at that point is that it reinforces that they don't have to go in a particular way. They can just let the board come to them. The best teams that draft, we talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. They just see who's the best player that's available and they take them. It doesn't matter if they've drafted someone. Like they drafted Jalen Carter, and then 16, 17 picks later, they're drafted Nolan Smith. So like that's the way you want to see this go. If somebody gets overdrafted within those first 5 or 6 picks and someone you expected to go in the top 5 falls to 10, take them. Doesn't matter what position they play.
It's funny because we were this is kind of how it's been leading up. I think we all have very similar opinions to Kieran, but like what my prediction is once we saw Matt Eberflus get fired, I thought Ryan Poles is going to have the most cookie cutter offseason in a positive way. And as of right now, everything I expected him to do, he's doing like verbatim. I knew he was going to invest heavily in guard. We all knew he was going to try to pay whatever center. We knew he was going to address that position. We knew he was going to give Ben Johnson, a blank check and do everything. If he survived and he has the ability, and that was kind of my one prop. I'll make fun of George McCaskey first. I'll be the first person in that line. But you got to give him credit to opening up that checkbook and literally just telling Ryan Poles, and whether that's him or Kevin Warren, and who's done this kind of like culture change. I've never seen the Bears spend so heavily and address needs so heavy-handedly in a way that is going to make everybody, like, the court of public opinion has already been swayed. Everyone it's a 10 out of 10 approval rating right now for Ryan Poles because he followed that cookie cutter offseason that we all kind of wanted to see from him. And I don't really think it's over yet. And that's why I agree with you. Like, unfortunately, if you're going to draft a defensive end, a guy like Shamar Stewart makes the most sense for a guy like Dennis Allen, even though it might be a reach or something like that. It's like his prototypical defensive end. Or you could still, keep going through the offensive line. I don't think Ryan Poles has earned, even with all these great moves, the grace to go like, you know what, fuck it, Ashton Genty at 10. You know what I mean? I don't think that he's earned that type of, because it's going to go back to like, oh, here we go. It's some more Ryan Poles stuff. Paul and I on our live draft show last year, we saw the name Roma Dunze scroll by and we're like, God damn it, this never works. You never take wide receivers like top 10. I get it. It was a good pick for the future and all that stuff, but go look through the history of the draft. Go look at guys that perform well in the first round. Defensive ends, you don't find them in rounds 2, 3, 4 very often. Left tackles, interior linemen, you don't find them in, some interior, but you'll find in 3, 4, 5. But like left tackles, right tackle, you got to go first, second round. You got to go defensive tackle, first round. That's where you get this stuff. So I don't think he's earned the grace to just say, you know what, running back, let's do it, number 10. And I'm so far in the mode of best player available that if you are locked in on Tyler Warren at tight end and you think he's going to be that much of a difference maker, I'd rather have that guy than Ashton Genty.
I love Tyler Warren.
Me too. And that's why if you can get this year's Brock Bowers, do it. I would honestly, my favorite pick right now, if you want to go wild card and the 2 best left tackles have been taken, because I think, and if you want to stay on for a fuck around mock draft, more than welcome to stay. Mm-hmm. I think the Raiders have basically told everybody they're not going quarterback. I think it's not in the first round, at least. I think the Jets have said, we're not going first round quarterback anymore. You thought we might, we're not. They could. I think that's like the second team to go quarterback other than the Giants. But other than that, I mean, I think it's going to be a little bit more chalk than you think. It's going to be 2 left tackles taken in the top 10. I think it's going to be 2 to 3 defensive ends taken in the top 10. And if all you have left is Nick Emanwari, I would not freak out if the Bears took Nick Emanwari at 10 and you have the next Kyle Hamilton or, DK Metcalf at safety. So I think at that point, it leaves you open to just take literally the biggest game changer. The best safety in a draft is, to me, if he's that far and away the most important, he's going to be a game changer day 1 or year 2, way more than a guy like Ashton Genty. The Ashton Genty could go for 1,800 total yards this season, and I'd still think it was a little bit of a wasted pick.
Yeah, I agree. To a point, Tyler Warren for me, and I can already visualize it if they picked him. The highlight package that they'll show up is just going to be everything that you've seen from Ben Johnson with the trick plays in Detroit. He's one of the very few players that you will see in trick plays snap the ball. He'll be the one that has thrown the ball. He has done an end around to where he popped it off and then ends up catching the ball later on. Like some of the trick plays that he was involved in Penn State, I looked at and I was just like, I just can't get it out of my head of seeing some of the plays that Detroit ran and be like, this is the type of guy that I could see it happening. Do I think he should be picked at number 10? Probably not. It's probably a little bit too soon, but I would probably put it ahead in terms of likelihood. I would put it ahead of Ashton Genty right now, even though I know fans wouldn't be particularly happy with that. I just think that anytime I've spoken to people in terms of like draft guys that we've had on or just kind of spoken in general and asking about running backs with the Bears, now it's probably changed this week because of kind of everything with the O-line, but the guys that they've always mentioned have been the more of the second round type players. Like obviously Caleb Johnson is one that fans have kind of deviated towards, but also like Quinshawn Judkins, Travion Henderson, and Marion Hampton. Like you don't, like you can talk about them, but you can go further if you want to. You don't have to go and take a running back in round 1. There's going to be guys that get selected in round 4 and round 5 that'll start this year, and that's where I'm just like, let's cool it down a little bit because there's definitely other selections that you can make there. Wait and see what happens in front of you. If it turns like, you never know, this might be one of those drafts where the likes of the Leonard Williams falls down, right? Where he was supposed to be a top 5 pick and I think gets picked like 7 or 8. It could be one of those where you're expecting somebody to go in the top 5 and they do fall. And you're just in a position to where you don't have to force anything. You can just let it happen. And if it works out for you, cool. If it doesn't, that's okay. Like the one thing that I like about this draft in terms of for the Bears is the positions where they need to kind of improve are quite deep in terms of this particular draft class. There's some guys that I like on the interior of the offensive line, but now you don't have to force that anymore. Do I want them to still draft offensive linemen early and often? Yes, I do, because you've just seen what happened with Aaron Banks, a very average offensive lineman just got paid $77 million. Braxton Jones next year is going to get paid $20 million a year, and it's not going to be from the Bears. But that's how important that those positions are. Would I be surprised if the Bears went to O-line at 10? Absolutely not, because they know that they're going to have a solution. Even if it's someone that's not going to start straight away, those are so valuable. And you said it yourself, Dave, that you typically can't find starters all the time once you get past, at best, very early in the second round. Sometimes you can find guys that can play, and you might have to strike it lucky a little bit with maybe some kind of off the field issues or something that would have brought them down, or injury concerns to why they weren't picked in the first round. But typically, if you want to get a guy that can play offensive tackle and play it at a consistent level, you probably have to take those guys in the first round. So I'm still kind of fairly much the same as I was prior to free agency, that where I'm at is offensive line, edge rusher, defensive tackle. Those are still the ones that I want to be able to look at. And if there's a top tier player available, I don't care that you've improved your two lines. You still need to keep doing it. The more depth, the better. And the more talent at those two positions, the more of a chance you have of winning football games.
Yeah, and I just wanted to totally agree with you too. I think that you still need to keep at it with the interior offensive line. Like, this isn't done by any means. This whole thing needed massive attention, and so far the steps we've taken are good. I mean, Thuney is a great addition, but I'm not so sold on Jonah Jackson. To me, he's just a piece, right? So I like what Foster asked here, because this is exactly where I was going to go to. Tevin Jenkins is still out there. What's going on with Tevin Jenkins, guys?
Dude has a bad back. That's what it is.
All right, open and shut. Next question.
I compare this to Bears fandom with Justin Fields, Kieran. Like, a little bit of, everybody's like, well, Justin Fields is going to go for a first-round pick, right? The whole NFL sees what we see, right? And then he ends up going for a fourth, arguably could have gone for a third. But then when you see the market and what the NFL actually thinks of a player that you have, and you're maybe just too close to the situation, it's not nearly as intense as you thought it was. And so we all thought, well, Tevin's that great. And I still think he'll get somewhere in the 17, 18 mil a year, probably 2 to 3 years. Maybe some incentive-laden deal that's like, if you're healthy, you'll get to play. But I think that's just the NFL speaking to the market of, this is a guy who I have seen go, face down and look limp and have, whatever they call it, the alligator arms. And
it's never a good look.
You know what I mean? I've seen that many, many times as a Bears fan, and I just don't know if that's kind of what we're seeing with, Tevin Jenkins. Like, the NFL just cooled off on what we all thought was a really much better player than he maybe is.
Yeah, like, the problem is he has an injury history that doesn't get better with age. And it's different if he had, like, I don't know, a broken leg, right? Because you can recover, you have surgery, and you can get back to 100%. When you have multiple injuries in your back at a young age, and it's a recurring issue where it happens year after year after year, teams aren't going to pay you big enough. They would rather pay guys like Aaron Banks, who's an inferior offensive lineman to Tevin Jenkins in terms of talent, but he's available. And there's a reason why Will Fries hasn't been signed yet. The reason is because he only played 4 games last year. So, like, these are some of the things that you look at, and teams are going to be wary of injuries, especially when it comes to free agents, because you're paying over the top for these guys. Tevin has to be careful where he wants to go. He's like, he might get more money somewhere else, but he really needs to look at himself in terms of, he needs to go to a good situation where he's, even if he has to take a shorter deal, try and prove it. Try and prove that you can stay healthy, because like, we're seeing other guys go off the board. Like, we saw Patrick McCarry go to Jacksonville. We've seen a couple of other offensive linemen get snapped up already, and he's still out there. Look, what I was kind of saying it before. I think it was like a day or two ago where people were wanting Tevin back and stuff like that, and I was just like, I think it was when Jonah Jackson was traded for. End of the day, Jonah Jackson has still proved more in the last 4 seasons than Tevin Jenkins has, because Tevin Jenkins misses multiple games, but also misses a lot of snaps between the games that he does play. And it was very obvious, if you listen to Ryan Poles, there was about a 2% chance that Tevin Jenkins was coming back here. If he decides that he wants to play in Chicago and will accept a 1-year, $5 million deal, will they do it? Yeah, they probably will, because he doesn't have to start for them. But if he wants to start, like, he's not going to get the money that he probably expected that he would.
Yeah, I think Foster commented on my comment of what we expected Tevin to sign, and we're probably wrong. At this point, it's probably not going to be as high or as long as we thought it would be initially. So, yeah, like you said, if I still see there's definitely needs out there, like the Texans, like the Washington football team, like the Patriots that'll probably give him a little bit more money. But like you said, if that's a situation he wants to be in and just get his brains bashed in, at this point, maybe his best, career path is to be a steady backup who doesn't have to worry about injury and keep collecting a few millions of dollars every year and kind of just, go year to year with certain teams. So, yeah, I'm not so sure. I did have a thought about your draft philosophy though, too.
Mhm.
And then in the sense of like where we're looking at with the Bears and the trading back and all that stuff, the depth in this draft, like you said, I think it's really just lending itself to where the Bears are favorable in terms of their areas of need and all those things. I don't know if you feel like it. I don't know. I'm not sure what happened to Paul here. Usually he has very good, stable internet connection. But if you'd be interested in, I would be happy to possibly pull up a PFF and we can kind of do, a modified, because there is also NFL news that I think happened that was really, really great. And I think just kind of seeing where the NFL happened, do you have any like favorite moves or favorite comments? I mean, we all just kind of like doing overall NFL news as well. Me and Carl, my other friend, do that. Do you have any comments on like, the DK Metcalfs, the Devontae Adams, how Aaron Rodgers is going to shake out, possibly Geno Smith and any of these moves? Have you had any that kind of,
Yeah, I've been
maybe rocked you to the core or something like that?
Yeah, my a bunch of group chats that I'm in have been going crazy with the potential Aaron Rodgers deal to Pittsburgh if it happens, because the likelihood is that the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be playing against the Green Bay Packers in my hometown of Dublin. So I will have to hate watch and
Nice.
decide which quarterback I hate more in Jordan Love or Aaron Rodgers. So it's that one's an interesting one. Justin Fields going to the Jets to reunite with Garrett Wilson was one that I expected because of how close those two guys are. And if that was an option, I think it was kind of written that was going to happen. What were some of the other deals that happened today?
I think the DK Metcalf one is quite funny, just in the sense of I think the only quarterback maybe on the face of the earth that can handle the attitude and give back more attitude than those two players is Aaron Rodgers. When DK Metcalf and George Pickens individually tell him to go fuck himself, then he goes, actually, fuck the two of you guys. So I think that's kind of how that's going to end up going. But
yeah, sorry about that, guys. My internet gave out for a quick second there. I don't know what happened.
You're good.
Carl giving us a little update that Javonte Williams signed a 1 year, $3.5 million contract, and that means Najee Harris will be earning minimum wage, which I agree. Veteran minimum deals because of the way that the running back rookie class. This is something I lost my train of thought as well, Kieran, and then going back to it. This is what I don't understand about people who also are big fans of drafting Ashton Genty now, all of a sudden. And you look at, the teams that we like to talk about, the Eagles, the Ravens, like where they take a strength and they make it stronger, right?
Yeah.
So I don't understand how people can now take an approach of, we have Jonah Jackson, Joe Thuney. Me and Paul like the moves. They're great. Drew Dalman, it fits the scheme of what Ben Johnson likes to do. A nice outside zone center who's fast and athletic and all that stuff. You haven't wrapped up these positions for the next 5 years moving forward. Braxton Jones is more than likely not going to participate in training camp after his really bad injury. So it's something that, why are we spreading people who want to do now Ashton Genty? I don't understand why you would spread your team that thin instead of taking an area that's been improved and make it even stronger. And that's kind of where I stand on the Ashton Genty thing. I know Paul and I just have a general draft philosophy that, it doesn't really matter how good the running back is. You just don't waste a top 10 pick on one. And that's where I just kind of don't appreciate the theory of Ashton Genty is going to be this difference maker. LaDainian Tomlinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, those were such luxurious pick. That draft was ridiculed by by fans for the Lions for the first 3-4 months. Jack Campbell, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta, they worked out in the end, but it was because they were in such a advantageous situation. They've already were like a 10-12 win team, and then they got to the luxury of putting that in. You're nobody yet. Like you can't, you got to build in the trenches still for the next 2, 3, 4 years and, make a strength even stronger. Additionally, a lot of these players that you just signed are all on 3-year contracts so that they line up with Caleb Williams so that when they leave, Caleb Williams can get that big contract or you move on from him which also, again, when people like to talk about, drafting a running back or whatever, you want to become the Atlanta Falcons. You want to take a wide receiver at 10, a running back at 10, a quarterback at 1, and you don't have the money to pay for any of them, and they all underperform. And now what do? You have nobody to kind of, move along. And then one more thing is, at this point, if you keep drafting linemen, DeAndre Swift will have a 1,200-yard season. If you make it a strength, it doesn't really matter. The difference between Ashton Genty and DeAndre Swift behind an excellent offensive line is going to be 300-yard difference total yardage, 400 yards if you want to get, a little bit more extreme. So that's kind of my thoughts on how hopefully we align in that kind of theory. So
yeah, I have 3 defensive tackles I would take ahead of Ashton Genty, 2 to 3 defensive ends, and 3 offensive linemen, or 4 offensive linemen that I would take before taking Genty. And this isn't anything to do with him as a player, because I think he's going to be very, very good. And I think he'll have a load of yards, a lot of touchdowns, all that. But I don't see the value in it, especially I think Jahmyr Gibbs was a bit of a different situation, and people still forget that Jahmyr Gibbs was the second running back taken that year. Bijan Robinson was the first one. So again, there was a difference though with both Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. They were threats in the passing game as well. You're not going to have Ashton Genty be a massive threat in the passing game. He'll be able to kind of be involved in the screen. He'll be able to for dump offs and stuff. But the way Ben Johnson likes to use the Jahmyr Gibbs type, that's just not the strengths of Genty, right? He would, if you were looking at it as what we saw in Detroit, he would be more of the David Montgomery role, which you can find in a second or a third round pick. So while Genty is definitely going to be picked very high, I actually don't think he's going to be there at 10. I think he's going to go to the Raiders or Jets, one of those two. Because if you're as the Jets, if you are going to invest in Justin Fields, which they've done today, him and Genty actually is a pretty fun combo, especially when you do have a guy like Garrett Wilson on the outside. They need to improve a little bit on the offensive line, but it's still okay. That could be one that could happen. I do think that the Raiders, with the moves that they've made recently, they're probably gearing towards that as well. So I don't even know if it's going to be an option for the Bears. I hope. I think if you're a Bears fan and you really want a top level player and one of the either offensive line or defensive line, you got to hope the Genty goes before the Bears are even on the clock, because that's one way for the likes of a Mason Graham or one of your favorite edge rushers or one of your favorite offensive linemen to fall down to number 10. And that's what makes this draft interesting. I think most other years you kind of knew where most guys were slotted within the first kind of 10 to 12 picks. I think there's going to be a lot of variations between when you look at your kind of favorite draft analyst of where they think certain players are going to go. And if there's a big deviation for those guys, try thinking what 32 teams are going to do, because their draft boards are usually completely different.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if you guys have a minute. I mean, I don't think it'll take us too long, but I do have the draft simulator pulled up. And I think part of what I think is in the sense of, like you said, if you're familiar with that meme of, when we had, the no lineman, Justin Fields throwing, and then, it's to a receiver, but then they get sacked, and it's the Joe Burrow meme of all those throwing football. It's the same thing of I would rather have Travion Henderson in the second round with a 39th pick, plus this Gray Zabel with pick 18 or 15, and, that, or Calvin Banks Jr. at pick whatever, 15, 18, if you trade back. And then that combination, rather than taking Ashton Genty at 10 and then going to the back end and getting, some sort of second level tier guard, Donovan Jackson or somebody like that. And I think that's kind of the difference, right? Is Ashton Genty, you can take it. He's a blue chipper for sure, but him running behind Donovan Jackson and an injured, one player away on the Bears team. If Braxton Jones isn't playing, you got Joe Thuney at left tackle now, and you have to keep making all these moves, and you're one injury away from who the hell is Ashton Genty running behind again, and who is Caleb Williams being protected by again. And then you're back to square one with where you started. You've got Ashton Genty. Who can he run behind? So that's why I'd be much more comfortable with like Caleb Johnson, like you said, who a lot of people compare to Matt Forte. This is why I like him. And, Caleb Johnson with a first-round guard rather than flip-flopping that and doing the first-round running back with a second-round guard. It's much less likely to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely. Kieran, what do you think of Drew Dalman? I wanted to pick your brain on that a little bit.
I like the move because I didn't want a rookie starting at center this year. I always say most of us that either A, didn't play the position, or B, don't have the time to look at all of the tape on offensive linemen. And I see people that watch a lot of the tape, but then when you listen to it, don't actually know what they're looking at. So I like to look at some of the guys, like when you talk about like Brandon Thorne, and who really knows what he's looking at to a point. Like you can kind of say the same for Olin Kreutz and stuff. What I do like is I think it's a good fit. I think you're looking at a guy that is an ascending player, is getting better, has been fairly steady, has been consistent, that the Atlanta Falcons wanted to bring back, but they had problems with in terms of their cap, so they had to make decisions. So they weren't able to bring him back. So I think it's a good move because the whole point is you want to solidify the middle of that offensive line, because you ask any quarterback what would they prefer to have pressure up the middle or pressure around the sides. They don't want the pressure up the middle because it really stops what they're able to do. Like they expect kind of on their blind side or even kind of the battles on the outside that's a possibility that they could get sacked, but sometimes they see that and have the opportunity to get out. If you're constantly getting destroyed up the middle, we saw it multiple times last year where within 2 seconds there's already a guy on him. Like adding Dalman, adding Thuney, adding Jackson, it solidifies the interior. Does it mean that you stop adding? No, because I always say the offensive line you have in week 1 will not be the offensive line you have in week 17. So you need to make sure that you have good depth because guys are going to get hurt. It happens every single year. It's almost a guarantee. So I like what they've done. I think it's definitely logically makes sense. Smart business, I think. But now they need to continue it and keep kind of going and trying to improve that position.
Yeah, we don't have to go too far into this draft, but I think first few, Paul, I know you're not super into the draft and into the mocks as much as maybe Kieran and I have been just listening to everybody. I putting in hours and hours, Kieran, lately of preparing myself for the draft earlier than usual. So can we just agree Abdul Carter is the number 1 pick and that's just how it's going to go. So
yeah,
I think we can agree there. It gets a little interesting with Cleveland, but I think their move with Kenny Pickett today also solidifies the fact that they're just not that interested in getting a quarterback this year, extending Myles Garrett and just showing him that the window that they're envisioning, I think, is longer than this year. So maybe I think the Cleveland Browns in an ideal world would suck for another year a little bit and start producing a little bit more star players so that the year after they can somehow get out of the Deshaun Watson contract and maybe get a top, quarterback next year with a top 5 pick. I don't know. How are your thoughts? I think the consensus is they're not going quarterback, right?
If it was me, I wouldn't. But that's because I don't like the quarterbacks this year.
Right.
In the position that they're in, they need to accumulate talent. I would say that they should be going for a guy like Travis Hunter, but will they? Look, in reality, when we get to this point in April, I think a trade is coming at this point and someone's going to move up. But for the basis of this, I think the first team that ends up picking a quarterback is going to be the Giants.
I agree. Yeah. I think that's interesting. You said of the trade. I don't know who they would trade with, and I don't know who's worth trading for in this draft. I think it's almost one of those bad drafts where you're stuck to stick and pick. And
Yeah.
so maybe they're going to be just forced, like you said, to take Travis Hunter. And other than I can't even name their other opposite cornerback on the other side, but the Browns probably do need some help at corner, help Myles Garrett kind of lock down a certain side of the defense. So I'm cool with that. I agree completely. I think the Giants are in an unavoidable situation to draft Cam Ward at this point, considering Aaron Rodgers is probably off the board. Sam Darnold's off the board in terms of free agency. Got Justin Fields, so Cam Ward, we're in agreement.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I think the Patriots is where it gets interesting, and I think I feel much more obvious about this one than I think people do, but I'd like to see what you say.
Who did they add today?
So they did get defensive tackle from the Eagles. What was his name? Milton Williams, I think it was.
They need to add an offensive lineman.
Is it that obvious? Okay. And so I've seen, I don't know how what places you listen to, and who you maybe you do your own evaluation. I've heard
Listen to
Membu.
no one.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Armand Membu has been basically firing up the board even over Will Campbell and everybody else. I think if they do pick somebody, it's going to be a physical freak like Armand Membu, more than Will Campbell. How about you?
Yeah. I've spoken to a couple of the beat guys for the Patriots and good friends with them, and they seem to think that they would prefer someone like Membu, who's a natural offensive tackle, versus someone like Will Campbell, that there's every possibility that he gets moved onto the inside. So I'd say Membu's going to be the first offensive lineman taken in the draft, purely because Josh Simmons is injury. If he wasn't injured, it would be him.
Okay, I agree. That was where I was going with I thought it was a little bit more obvious comment than I think most people do. So I agree. Membu is probably number one. Jags, again, I think people are overthinking it a little bit. How about you?
Yeah, again, I think they've got to protect Trevor Lawrence if they're going to try and build around him. I still think this is why I struggle with offensive linemen getting to 10. Where they go, I'm not sure. Now they did get rid of. They still need some help on the interior, so there's a possibility that you could see a Mason Graham going at this point as well. But I do think that they're going to probably go offensive line because they're going to need to keep improving that, and they've lost a couple of players over the last couple of years. So I won't be surprised if it was Will Campbell. For me, it's probably between him and Mason Graham at this point.
Interesting. I feel like Will Campbell is the ultimate Jacksonville Jaguars draft too high, probably overdraft, and he busts a little bit and doesn't do as well as anybody thinks. Will Campbell feels like the stupid one. I think Mason Graham feels like the obvious one, but I'm going to go with you and say if they're all behind Trevor, which makes sense, it's their crazy investment. And I think, I don't think they have inspired any confidence with the rest of their front office or coaching staff to make good decisions moving forward. So let's go with Will Campbell. Okay. You said you have a strong feeling that the Raiders go Ashton Genty now with 100%. Pete Carroll. Yeah. Is it that obvious? Yeah. Okay. I have heard a lot of people say that. I just don't know why. I'm curious as to why it's so obvious to a lot of people.
For me, it's look, could they go receiver? Maybe. I think the way they're going to, like, when you look at what they did in terms of trading for Geno, like, he has his limitations. He's going to need a pretty good running game. That's when he was good with Seattle, when they had multiple guys there. What does Pete Carroll know for his offense is like, it's very reminiscent of Marshawn Lynch in terms of what he was able to provide for him, breaking a load of tackles. I see something similar with Ashton Genty. I think the way they've set up is this is probably the first spot of where he could potentially go. And that's why I think I would go that way.
I like your explanation of it. Jets having picked up Justin Fields, I don't feel like that's a long-term solution at quarterback for them, and I don't think they think he's the long-term solution, but I think they believe he's a 2-year plan. And so I don't know how much they're going to invest offensively to help him out rather than potentially, I think if Mason Graham falls to the Jets, looking at Aaron Glenn and what he likes to do, I can't fathom them ignoring Mason Graham at 7. I don't know about you.
Yeah, this is why I don't think Mason Graham actually gets to 10, because the 3 teams in front of them would probably draft Mason Graham. So that's why I think this is probably the first spot of, if he did fall, it doesn't matter. He's going to get drafted there.
That or somebody's going to trade with the Jets to go get him, right? I mean, somebody falls in love with Mason Graham, I think. So Panthers is an interesting one. I think the same logic you applied to maybe, the same logic you applied with like Jacksonville and taking a tackle. I feel like they're just all in on protecting Bryce Young and giving him weapons, and they don't have a single receiver on that team. I don't think Tetairoa McMillan is. He gives me Mike Evans, but discount Mike Evans so bad. And nowhere near the prospect that Mike Evans was when he was coming out, but that's what I think he provides. And it makes the most sense in terms of on paper and giving him weapons. And there you haven't picked up anybody yet. I don't know if they're gonna, but there are obviously a lot of places that wide receivers still have to go. Keenan Allen and the like. I don't think he'd go to Carolina, but what are your thoughts? I think Tetairoa McMillan makes sense, but even like a guy like Tyler Warren, if people fell in love with, makes sense here too.
It makes sense.
Real quick, I don't think a lot of things that Carolina does make sense, period. So just throwing that out there.
Point. I do like their coach though, so I do think he gets the final say in getting himself a new toy to work with.
Yeah, I think people will discount the need that they have at corner just because of what we saw with JC Horn today, getting $100 million, but they had very little help there in the secondary last year. If it was me, I'd probably go for one of Will Johnson or Barron, but I don't think they're going to go in that direction. I think they're probably going to try and help out Bryce, because that's the most important thing. They have an offensive head coach, and so I think they'll probably go receiver because they have been involved in trying to get some of these guys.
I wouldn't even be surprised if Luther Burden or from Texas, Matthew Golden go before Tetairoa McMillan. I think it's just such a bad class.
It is. There's a few nice players in the middle of the draft that for specific roles can do a job, but there's no high end talent, I don't think.
No. So I think we go with McMillan here. I think it's crazy how many defensive ends we've just left on the board, which is my biggest issue, because I just can't imagine this many defensive ends being ignored in a draft this deep with defensive ends. And that's why I look at it and everything we did makes sense. But I think, is this something that like we're overthinking and teams in the NFL are just like, no, dude, trenches. And we just see like 4 defensive ends go in the top 10. I think it's possible though.
It's possible. I think there'll be more. There could potentially be more offensive linemen being taken.
That would be a wild one too as well. Number 9, I think Saints have to go defensive end. It's just, who is your second favorite defensive end? No, is it James Pierce? Is it fella from Georgia? Michael Williams, I've heard. Shamar Stewart, physically wise. Any thoughts?
I worry about James Pierce.
I do too. He doesn't impress me, but
I honestly, like, there's
6'5", 243. That's crazy.
Yeah. I know a lot of people like him, but there's been a few snippets of kind of issues. What other offensive tackles are there?
For the Saints, availability-wise, we're still looking at Josh Simmons. If he goes that early, I highly doubt it. But he's on track to be fully healthy by the start of training camp. So if you think...
I guess with the Saints, I wouldn't be surprised if they went for a James Pierce. Would they go? They don't need corner. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they went in that direction. Whoever the best edge rusher is.
Or this is the place where a team pops up and takes Tyler Warren if they fell in love, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Trades with the Saints. Saints are in a 5-year rebuild right now. They would take literally anything. They'd take a 4th-round pick to move down 2 spots, and I wouldn't blame them.
Yeah,
but if we're just sticking to picking, do we just say James Pierce probably?
Yeah, let's just do that.
So this realistically gives you these players to pick from for the Bears. Mm-hmm. Ideally, I'd love to trade as well. Cowboys to 12 sounds unbelievable.
Mm-hmm. That would be great.
The other option, which I'm not seeing for some reason, is...
Yeah, I mean, who would a team be trading up for is the other question too, though.
This is, again, with certain teams, I just...
you
got to understand somebody's fallen in love. Yeah, it's Tyler. Somebody's desperate for Tyler Warren somewhere. And this is the thing that Paul and Carl and I were talking about the other day. The league is such a league of parity that somebody saw what Brock Bowers did and thinks, if I had Brock Bowers this year, we would have been a playoff team. Somebody's going to see what the running backs did in Baltimore or in Philly and say, if we just had signed them, we'd probably be a playoff team too. And they just convince themselves of those things, which maybe not true, but this is where Tyler Warren last year with Brock Bowers might have been 1A, 1B in terms of prospects of tight ends. Tyler Warren might have beaten out Brock Bowers in terms as a prospect last year. So people who know that are going to say, well, if Brock Bowers did that with the Raiders, who suck, on my team, he would be excellent or elite or just a superstar. So for the Bears, I mean, I don't know. I would ideally like to trade down. But if you're stuck there and taking somebody, any preferences? Kelvin Banks, Josh Simmons, Tyler Warren.
I like Tyler Warren. I like Kenneth Grant. I like... The problem is for defensive tackles, I like too many guys in the middle rounds where I don't feel like you need to do it now. Yeah. Kelvin Banks, decent. I like, depending on what you do, like it's too early if they traded down. I would not be opposed to Walter Nolan being a potential pick at this point as well. Then my other question is like, how is the leg of Josh Simmons? If his medicals came back and he was here, I'd have no problem. He's a pure left tackle and could easily be someone that you play. But the problem is he going to be healthy? And that's the question. I worry about a guy that, like I said, has got an ACL tear so early on. It's a tough one. The other one is, as a fun one for Dennis Allen, I know it says, in terms of any mock draft, it says he's a linebacker, but can probably be put anywhere. As Jalen Walker from Georgia is an interesting one as well.
Is he the one with character concerns that I can recall?
Yeah, you passed him up. He was like 18, rank 18, I think.
Mm-hmm.
A little lower.
I think he's 30 something. 32 maybe.
Jalen Walker.
There you go.
30.
Yep, 30.
Yeah.
6'2", 245. Off ball plus, very versatile from what I've understood and what I've heard. Very versatile, kind of like replaces. He becomes like a, Demario Davis type player for Dennis Allen, right? Like a little bowling ball, can blitz up the middle, blitz off the edge, that kind of thing. So.
Yeah, like I don't think he would be the pick, but I definitely wouldn't be mad. I think at this point, you're probably looking at Edge or Tyler Warren.
Yeah, I think you need edge still on this team. And I mean, I think if you're going to pick at pick 10, and ideally you trade back, but I mean, we haven't done a single trade this whole mock. So, I don't want to just do one for our team. But yeah, if team needs wise, I mean, you still need defensive line. You need edge.
If you're doing Edge, I'm probably just at this point, I'm probably taking, in terms of value, you're probably looking at the upside of a Michael Williams, where you'd believe in Dennis Allen making him into a top level edge rusher. Like, the production hasn't always been there, but like the flashes every single year you watch, and it is, and it's going to be an interesting one. I just think he fits very similar to what Dennis Allen would like, and I think of those guys that could be available around that time, if I had to guess on who Dennis Allen would like, I would probably guess Michael Williams. But again, there's
Well, yeah. I mean, we got to the Bears pick, and I don't want to make you do a whole first round mock here, and I'm sure it's past 10, 11 o'clock over there for you. So
right. I think Williams is a safe pick at this point too.
I think so too, and I think ideally we'd all want to trade back, but in terms of the scheme fit of what, like we said, 6'5", 265, a little bit bigger of an edge pass rusher. And at this point, what we're seeing from like people like Philadelphia and teams like that is like you can just never have enough. And there's going to be some crazy NASCAR packages where guys that you think should be like full-time starters on this team maybe just don't play as much as you like to think that they will. And I'm okay with that. So, everybody who's fallen in love with Gervon Dexter, which I like him too. If he doesn't play as much as you want him to, that's okay. If it's giving Grady Jarrett more minutes, right, or more snaps. So I'm okay with that as well. So, Paul, anything to add? I think we're okay for today with Kieran.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say Odeyingbo and Grady Jarrett. I mean, Odeyingbo's been moved around the line a little bit. He's an edge, but he's also played some snaps inside from what I've seen. And so that's why I think the need from the draft point of view kind of goes more towards the edge position focus wise. Because I think you've added to the interior of the defensive line a little bit today, which definitely helps. But yeah, I just wanted to get Kieran's thoughts on just those two guys real quick, Odeyingbo and Jarrett, and what do you think those additions will do for the Bears this next upcoming year?
I think Jarrett's an easy one. He's been, other than the year he got an ACL tear, consistency, always is performing at a high level. I think it's very telling that he was a free agent for about 2 hours. So I think that's very, very telling. I think that's a really good move because it means it's not all on Gervon. Dayo can play inside, outside. I know the sack numbers weren't there this year, but in terms of when you look at some of the guys that got paid, like the pressures were pretty consistent across the board in terms of what he got. Like you can even just look in the last 2 seasons for him versus Josh Sweat. They're not that too dissimilar. I think with the sacks, I know everybody kind of goes in on Dayo this year for only getting 3 sacks, but I think the year before he got 12. So like there's good things that you can see there, especially if you do come away with another edge rusher early on in the draft to where you can move him around the defensive line based on kind of the package that you want to play, based on the looks that you get from the offense. Like it helps both if you draft an edge rusher early that they're not going to have to be that kind of 3-down edge rusher straight away, that they can come in advantageous positions and you're setting up a rookie for success. But also you're hopeful that he fits in the mold of a defensive end that Dennis Allen likes, and you have to trust in Dennis Allen to be able to develop, because he's been able to do it with relatively unknown players in the past and made them better. And the one thing I do like is the age profile of Dayo is the one that you do pay. It's still, every single deal they've done is pretty short. It's still only 3 years. They haven't gone too far over. They're all fairly consistent, all in like the 40 million mark. Most of them are between like 25 to 32 million guaranteed. Again, I don't think you can complain too much about the contract. It's if you sign an edge rusher or if you draft an edge rusher high in the draft, I think people will be very happy with this defensive line. I do still think that they'll have to bring in another defensive tackle that can at least sub in and out to play nose, because that's something that they are missing right now. If they can do that, I think the defensive line is going to look pretty good going into this year. If you can add a piece or two on the offensive line as well, some depth players in free agency, and maybe you draft somebody early on as well, like you could potentially get some guys that might have to shift from tackle to guard that maybe you wouldn't want to start straight away in their rookie season, but can come in a pinch. I like the guy from Arizona, Jonah. He's been playing offensive tackle, but he's a monster. So if you can bring him in to develop him as well, that could be good. But I think overall the signings make sense, and I think now it's just going to be about being smart on how you're going to round out this roster and preparing for the draft.
I do have one more question for you, because I know how I feel about it, Kieran. Like, I feel like this time around, Poles is making moves heavily dictated by his coordinators and his coaches. I feel like there's a lot more direction, and all of these moves fit really specific blueprints. Are you feeling that? And how do you feel about like how these players kind of line up with what their coaches and position coaches are kind of, requiring from their schemes?
Yeah, because like they brought these coaches in for a reason. You have to listen to them, because you need to bring in guys that can actually. I always say there's two things. There's a scheme fit and a culture fit, and you need to be able to bring in guys that can do both. And I think that they've started to do this. I think the players that they brought in are so far this time around, there's a good leadership group there in terms of, you look at Jarrett, you look at the likes of Thuney, you look at even to a point like Jonah Jackson, from all accounts, is a very good leader as well. Even people around the LA Rams, where it didn't work out, speak very highly of him. So like, I like what they've been able to. Logically, it makes sense. But yeah, I think what they need to be able to do is they need to be able to put in guys that are going to fit in seamlessly to what the coaches want to do. So then it makes it easier for when the coaches are trying to coach these guys up and develop them, because it's all well and good drafting guys that played well in college, but it's supposed to be draft and develop. And we've been doing the first part and not doing the second part. So that's what you're paying these coaches a lot of money for. So you should trust in the type of players that they want. It may not be it might be something like where a coach like Dennis Allen, for example, is like, I want this style of player. And then when free agency kind of comes around, they know who's available. They could have three options and then negotiate with these guys and see which one's the best deal for the Bears. And that's what could have happened. They do set a value, but I think when you see a guy like Grady, Jarrett get available, if you have an opportunity to sign them, I think you kind of have to take it when you have needs on the defensive line, because he consistently makes plays. He's a great player. And again, he's a leader, which this team badly needs. So I think overall, really good pick. And hopefully it works out, and hopefully they can continue to add to that defensive line, because if they do, I always say, if you have a good defensive line and offensive line, you're looking at a minimum of like 7 to 8 wins. If you pair that with good quarterback play, you're looking at a team that will consistently win double-digit wins every single year. But the problem for the Bears is they never built the O-line and D-line at the same time. So they need to be able to do that. If they can, they'll start to see those win totals creep up every year.
Cool. Well, yeah, once again, Kieran from Irish Bears Show. For anybody who wants to see your content, I know you're big on Twitter. I also have a link to your YouTube in the description of the video. So for anybody who wants to check out some Bears content from the Irish Bears Show, those are the links to do so. Thanks so much, man, for finding the time tonight. I know, like I said, you're on a time difference, but we really appreciate you hopping on with us and talking some Bears, man. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime, guys.
Yeah, thank you, dude.
All right, thank you, guys. Have a nice one.
David, one last thing I just wanted to kind of add in. You know, I know we always talk about these offensive linemen like failures that Ryan Poles has gone through, and we always forget one name. It's the very first one. Riley Reef.
Oh, good Lord. Was that much of an experiment, though?
I know, but I'm just saying,
seventh round pick or something like that.
You got to toss it in there too. You know what I mean? For some reason, that one always gets left out. So
I thought another funny name that came across the waiver wire today was Larry Ogunjobi's a free agent again. So
look at that! Yikes! Can he pass a physical this time around?
Well, I don't know. We'll find out when another team tries to sign him. But
yeah, so that was cool for Kieran to hop on with us and for us to do that mock draft and everything. So yeah, I think we've taken this show just about as far as it can go tonight.
Yep. So I think we can start wrapping up. And yeah, thanks for everybody who tuned in. We'll me and Carl will be back tomorrow, kind of talking a little bit more about general NFL moves and any continuing movements for the NFL free agency that's kind of going on. So if anybody wants to join us tomorrow, me and Carl, probably around 6 o'clock as well for NFL ski. And, whoever wants to join and hop on, feel free. Otherwise, yeah, thanks for everybody for watching as always, and we'll see you next time, right?
Yep. Thank you. Bear down, guys.
Yeah. Take care.